I'm John Beethan with AlternativeHealthTools.com, the podcast. And this is episode 50, titled Human Slavery to Human Freedom with Daniel Walker, who lives in New Zealand. It's subtitled Fighting from a Place of Wholeness, Self-Compassion, and Acceptance, Knowing That I Am Enough. Appropriate to be released on this date, the 4th of July weekend, 2016. And so you know, this episode contains sensitive material about human trafficking, but there's nothing explicit here. But for you, and what is here, is the story of how Daniel discovered the powerful link between self-compassion and performance, and how he was able to transform his own mindset into a more resilient self-compassion in order to operate successfully within the traumatic and stressful environments he worked in. There are many, many references to the work of Brene Brown, so if you're curious about that work, listen on.
You know, I don't say this with any judgment. This was just my story. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make a significant difference because in doing so, I came to see that if I was that superhero, if I was the guy making a difference, rescuing women and children, then I must be okay. You know, then I must be a good guy. And I could look at myself then with acceptance and say, you know, look, I am okay. Look at these great things I'm doing. Mm-hmm. As opposed to what I've discovered is a far more healthy and freeing place is doing that work from, well, doing anything, doing any kind of, doing life actually from a place of wholeness and worthiness where we're not fighting for freedom, we're fighting from freedom. We're fighting from a place of wholeness and worthiness where we know deep within ourselves, in our bones, as Brene Brown would say, that we are enough.
I want to welcome everyone back to AlternativeHealthTools.com, the podcast. And today I'm really fortunate to introduce Daniel Walker. And Daniel was introduced to me through Amanda Wirtz. So Amanda was on episode 42. That was titled Service Above Self, Building Hope for the Future of Others. And evidently Amanda and Daniel met each other in New Zealand when she was there really a couple of weeks ago. So Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's really great to have you. Really, really. How did you and Amanda meet, actually?
Well, we were both speakers at a Rotary International conference, and I was talking about human slavery to human freedom, and Amanda was telling her story, and yeah, we connected in and around that event.
Nice. Well, Amanda's amazing. Like her podcast, you know, is Service Above Self, so she's all about helping other people. And I'm looking at your website at danielwalker.nz, and it's subtitled Undercover Agent, Author, and Speaker. So I was just sort of curious, when you did meet Amanda and everything, what did you speak on while you were there?
Well, I basically just told my story in a similar way to Amanda does, I guess, but a very different story from working undercover in the human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking industry, working as an investigator, gathering evidence that could be used to set women and children free from sex trafficking, to writing a book, and founding an organization that goes even deeper into the darkness of human slavery, to speaking about my experiences and my journey and the things I've seen and learned along the way.
How long did you do that?
Well, I worked for an American organization for 4 years, and then for the organization I founded in New Zealand for 4 years. So I guess I've spent between 8 to 10 years specifically in the human trafficking arena.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. Part of the reason you're here is because this topic has come to my attention twice in 1 week. where I was asked to introduce somebody at a concert here outside of San Diego for a benefit for an organization that helps create safe houses for those really children that have escaped and need a place to stay. So, and I know that really you've gone beyond that in a sense, and you're really talking about a completely different thing right now, which is really your journey and your awareness, and it's a completely different topic right now. It's, my notes basically are saying, it's like wanting to go deeper in knowing we are enough and the journey from human slavery. So let's talk about a little bit of that, because you had some sort of defining moment, right?
Yes, well, I guess a number of defining moments.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I, like many boys, wanted to be a superhero when I grew up, and subsequently, after finishing university, joined the police and became a detective, and certainly loved that life of being the good guy, being the hero, and then learned about an organization that used detectives to gather evidence, to go undercover in a number of countries. Ultimately, I worked in 12 countries around the world, including the United States, actually, pretending to be a pedophile, a sex tourist, a sex tour operator, going into brothels, gentlemen's clubs, organized crime, and buying and selling women and children, but in doing so, gathering evidence of those crimes, such that we could facilitate two things. Firstly, the rescue of the victims and their placement in a aftercare facility, but also the prosecution, seeking justice for those who were involved, because there are a number of organizations that just focus on the rescue, and that's fantastic. And for every one is enough. We always say that if all we do is rescue one woman or one child, it is enough. But of course, it's such a massive global industry. $100 billion US and growing every year. The fastest growing criminal industry, international criminal industry in the world, so it's absolutely massive. So unless we also prosecute and bring down some of those criminal entities involved, then we're always going to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So it was very much about rescue, about prosecution. And I suppose probably the first defining moment for me was walking into a brothel in Southeast Asia, this was a village whose number one income was the sale of children, and the brothel manager came into the room, and he had two girls who were about 15 and 16 years old. Based on the information I'd seen, I knew there were younger children available. So I said, actually, no, I'm looking for something a bit different. Thanks anyway, and went to leave. And he said, oh, no, wait, I know what you want. And he left the room, and he came back in the room a few moments later, and he had two 6-year-old girls. And they had piggy tails in their hair and teddy bears on their shirt. And he said, for $30 US, you can have these girls and do whatever you want. I pretended to be thrilled, of course, and said, wow, this is awesome. I've got some clients that will love these children. Do you have any more? And he said, absolutely. And over the next 3 weeks, he introduced me to nearly 50 children between the ages of 5 and 12 years old, who were being sold every day to men from Australia, United States, Canada, Europe, New Zealand, and other Asian countries. And we went on to set up a sting operation. The local police were able to, after some convincing, to join us, and we did facilitate the rescue of some of those children, but not all. And the youngest child I carried out of a brothel that day was 5 years old. But there were many more children that I had met and documented and gathered evidence upon, who we weren't able to rescue because, for a number of reasons, logistically on the day of the operation, there was a tip-off, there were things that went wrong, I just didn't have enough hands in one case to hold on to the children, and they'd been told to run when the police arrived, and run they did, and it was a traumatic event, both at one end of the spectrum, completely amazing to carry, as I say, a 5-year-old girl out of a place of rape for profit, but also to watch these other children run from our rescue operation back into the arms of those who would continue to exploit them, and we never saw them again. So, it's that was probably one of the early defining moments, just showing how easy it is in some senses to combat modern day slavery. As you said, there is a growing awareness around the world that there are more slaves today than at any other time in human history. And the fact that sex trafficking, human trafficking is the fastest growing form of slavery is repugnant and in one sense an indictment on our modern global community.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, in terms of your speaking engagements, is it largely to just bring awareness to people?
No, it's not. I went on to work in that industry, as I said, for 4 years, and I loved every minute of it. And certainly raising awareness of the issue was huge. But I guess I've discovered raising awareness in and of itself doesn't necessarily change anything. That there is so much awareness now out there, but currently the statistics have not changed. Less than 1% of all victims will be rescued, and that's as of today's statistics. Which represents an appalling failure on behalf of the global community to combat this crime. If you had if the criminals in your community had less than a 1% chance of getting caught, if they burgled your home or attacked your family, then you would be incredibly vulnerable. It's basically almost zero risk. In fact, in some countries, you're more likely to be hit by lightning than you are to be held accountable for trafficking in human beings. So it's not just, certainly it starts with raising awareness, but this work destroyed me. The first time around, it really, because I saw so many things behind the brothel doors that were traumatic, and in some cases we were able to rescue these women and children, but in so many more cases we were not. The corruption, the gender inequality, the huge criminal machine that profits from this industry was sometimes just so great, and I became completely burned out, and it was all consuming, this work of rescue, and it ultimately led me to be, I ended up back in New Zealand, divorced, depressed, and very, very discouraged. That I'd been able to rescue several hundred women and children, but had left several thousand behind, and I didn't know what to do with that. And it was actually during that time that I went to see the police psychologist and was working through secondary trauma, and he encouraged me to write down my thoughts, and I wrote a book called God in a Brothel. And that was very cathartic. It was very healing to do so, and also quite a huge weight lifted from my shoulders, because in writing the book I hoped that people would read the book, and in reading the book they would join the movement, join the fight. And it was on the back of that book that I talked about this dream I had of founding an organization that would allow the work to be more sustainable, that would where the staff, the investigators, would have mandatory care, basically self-care, organizational care, where there would be counseling and debriefing, and the spouses would be included, just so that the work, in recognition of the work, that it could be more sustainable. Mm-hmm. So in 2012 we founded Nvader, and that was the goal. And we set up an office in Thailand, and have a number of staff working there to this day who are continuing in the work of rescue and prosecution, mm-hmm. And hopefully doing so in a more sustainable way that looks after the staff. That is that the work is done in recognition of the fact that the people doing the rescue, the people donating and supporting the work, the people running the office and working on the computers, that their freedom is as important as the freedom of those we're seeking to serve, and that if we become slaves ourselves in the process of helping other people be free, then we are not helping anyone.
Mm. Yeah, and that's where the shift sort of in your consciousness about all this really has come to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, I know, the ongoing challenge for so many people in not just organizations fighting literal human slavery, but any time I think a human being sets out on a journey to make a difference in the world, mm-hmm. to add value to others, to serve others, to give. The basis upon which we do that, I think, is absolutely crucial to whether what we do is an expression of us just hustling for our worthiness, mm-hmm. Where we are really just seeking to make a difference because there's some unmet need in ourselves. We want to feel good about ourselves. The more significant that was certainly my case. Mm-hmm. I don't say this with any judgment. This was just my story. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make a significant difference, because in doing so, I came to see that if I was that superhero, if I was the guy making a difference, rescuing women and children, then I must be okay. Then I must be a good guy. Mm-hmm. And I could look at myself then with acceptance and say, look, I am okay. Look at these great things I'm doing, mm-hmm. as opposed to what I've discovered is a far more healthy mm-hmm. And freeing place, is doing that work doing any kind of doing life actually from a place of wholeness and worthiness, where we're not fighting for freedom, we're fighting from freedom. We're fighting from a place mm-hmm. of wholeness and worthiness, where we know deep within ourselves, in our bones, as mm-hmm. Brene Brown would say, that we are enough.
We are enough.
And so the work to set other people free in whatever form it takes is then not done as an expression of our own slavery and unworthiness and inadequacy, which often leads to so much destruction and burnout and misplaced effort and ego, but comes from a place of wholeness and worthiness, so that even if and probably when we fail, those failures are not tied to our identity, to our significance, our purpose, our meaning. Mm-hmm. We can continue in the face of failure and disappointment, and when our efforts, as I described, when we fail to rescue those women and children, for example, it doesn't destroy us, because what we do, it does not define us. It's who we are.
It's who we are. Yeah, that's fabulous. No, I really like it. There's a part of me in all this that is somewhat speechless, and it's like, what does someone do about this particular situation? But what you had spoken to a few minutes ago about sort of losing yourself in thinking that if you do X, if this happens, then you will be worthy. I see that a lot. And, living in Southern California, there's a lot of people that are really focused on helping other people. I just met somebody with lunch that is doing a project on the homeless. And, it's easy to see that people just get totally drained by it and not coming from the place that you're talking about, coming from a place of freedom.
Yeah. As I say, it's not limited to fighting literal slavery. If anything, this journey has only been highlighted because we were fighting literal slavery. But ironically, it was actually a slave, if you like, who first revealed this to me. And, she was a 15-year-old girl from Burma, from Myanmar, and she had been trafficked. Her auntie actually came to the family, and trafficking is just deception and coercion. It's lies and force. And she came with a lie to the family, telling the parents that she could get Eva, their 15-year-old daughter, a job in northern Thailand selling clothing, and she would be able to make some great money and send it home and support the family. So they believed the auntie, and Eva went with the auntie to northern Thailand. But as so often happens, the auntie took her straight to a brothel. She sold her as a virgin, so she got great money because Eva was still a virgin. And the brothel manager then kept her imprisoned until he could find a customer who was willing to pay the very high price to rape a virgin. And sadly, ultimately, that man came forward some weeks later, and Eva was raped and then put out with the other girls in this brothel. Bars on the windows, chains on the doors, and a steady stream of men willing to exploit her. One of my colleagues was able to infiltrate that place and meet Eva and find out that she was a victim of trafficking. The local police did raid that place, and she was rescued some months later. And when they took Eva back to collect her belongings from that brothel after the perpetrators had been arrested, they saw this writing on the wall above her bed in what had effectively been her prison cell. And they said, "Eva, what's this writing on the wall?" And she said, "Well, the writing there is it's a psalm from the Old Testament, and it says, 'When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, even then I will trust that you are good, that you are for me, and that I am loved.'" And I find that. It's hard to tell that without actually shedding a few tears myself. But, I saw in this petite little 15 or 16-year-old girl, she was, in one sense, yes, she was rescued from physical captivity. But in another sense, she was free long before she was ever rescued because she knew who she was. She couldn't understand or articulate the trauma that she was experiencing, but she knew that there was a part of her that could never be taken, that was worthy no matter how she was treated by those around her. And it's a common theme. Viktor Frankl in Nazi concentration camps discovered the same thing, and that essentially between stimulus and response there is that very small space. But in that space lies our freedom, and it's the space of I am, that I am enough, and I am loved, and that nobody or nothing can take that away. And if then I suppose it was Eva who began my who inspired me to go deeper, because when my own life did fall apart around me. It was her inspiration and others like her who pointed me to a place where actually I don't want to ever again live out of a place of shame and I am not I'm not good enough, I'm not handsome enough, strong enough, fast enough, whatever enough. But actually only ever, especially when it comes to serving other people, giving and adding value to whether it's just our family, our community, the world, that we are invited to do that from a place of wholeness and not shame.
It makes total sense. Yeah. Well, I just, part of me wants to just ask the question is, what can we do? Started talking about awareness, and we're going deeper into that subject, certainly. And it was brought to my attention that that this whole human trafficking is so widespread that you could pretty much go to any mall from 2:00 till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and actually witness it really happening. And there's a part of me that I don't know if that's true. I was going to ask you what you thought of that in a minute, but there's just a big part of me that wants to go to one of these places, go to one of these malls and, do something. Stop it. I don't know. What can people do?
Well,
you have to,
I guess,
yeah.
In the past, I would have said, well, first of all, that's absolutely true in that it is, as I said, the fastest growing criminal industry. And it is only the fastest growing criminal industry because so many people are making so much money from it. And because the bad guys can. And, I have worked in Washington, D.C., and Las Vegas, Nevada, and Atlanta, Georgia, and have bought and sold young women and children in the land of the free and the home of the brave, where, statistically there are more than 100,000 children and young people being sold every day on the streets.
Here in the U.S.
In the United States, yeah. We gathered evidence, we passed that on to the authorities, and in some cases they were able to intervene and facilitate rescue and prosecution, and in other cases they were not. A mall, as you said, is often one of those places where young women, young girls in particular, are preyed upon. So I suppose in the past, as I say, I would have responded by saying, well, there's all sorts of organizations in the United States. There's aftercare centers. There's rescue organizations. Certainly would encourage people to be aware so that when they see things, it's like the war on terror in a way. Encouraging people to be vigilant, and I suppose in the same way, the war on slavery. But I guess coming back to what we were talking about earlier, I suppose I would say that before you do anything is to just do some self-examination, I suppose. And yes, absolutely, join the fight, join the movement, absolutely. But maybe by self-examination, again, I don't mean endless introspection, but join the fight at a time when you know you are doing so, again, from a place of freedom and wholeness. And obviously that's an ongoing journey. But I guess all I would say is, talk to those around you, talk to those who act as friends, family, coaches, mentors in your life. Because if you go into this work of abolition, of again fighting for freedom, it can and will chew you up and spit you out. And just like any as you said, major issue that involves human trauma and suffering, whether it's this or like you said earlier, fighting homelessness, whatever it is, any kind of service. It can chew you up and spit you out, and the invitation, I think, is to first do that internal work, such that you come to this place from a place of freedom, And this work is, if you like, an overflow of the freedom that you already know and experience. Because if you go into this arena or any similar arena like it, it will end up in it will consume you. It will, like many, or if it's a cause, like many others, it will chew you up and spit you out. And so, yeah, I guess I would say it's both and, right? It's and that's actually the conversation I had with Amanda, who you referred to earlier on, because we grew up in our Judeo-Christian culture where the religious paradigm has sometimes twisted what is a good thing. We're invited to love others as we love ourselves. And in so many of our communities, we have this idea that we are supposed to love others more than ourselves, and that serving others in a sacrificial kind of way is the only way, and is in fact the more noble way. Where I suppose just from my own experience, I've found that to be flawed, to be untrue, and ultimately lead to, as I say, brokenness and burnout. So again, if we do whatever work we're involved in, if we're doing it from a place of I will show myself the same love and care and compassion that I want to show others around me, then this work suddenly becomes incredibly sustainable and life-giving. And I don't say that just for the health and safety and welfare of ourselves, but the very fact that there's an army of young men in America who can go into malls and twist and seduce the minds of so many young women and children, I think again is a sign that we are not doing a good job of helping young people know that they are enough, such that again it's that wider invitation to transform culture, such that young women know that they are loved, that they are enough, and that no lies, no sweet talking, dream selling pimp can then pose a threat to the hearts and minds of our daughters, because they know that they are worthy, they know they're loved, and they therefore are more resilient and will be less likely to fall for the predators that would seek to enslave and traffic them.
Yep. I was going to talk a little bit about some resources. You had mentioned Brene Brown, and I think we may have talked about Byron Katie. I have a very favorite Buddhist meditation teacher, Tara Brach. And I've experienced those three people in that work. And I'm giving resources here for people mainly because, how does one get in touch with reality in a sense of not the trance? And I think so many people live in a trance. The other thing I was going to say is that these young people, these young girls, even young boys, I've become aware of an organization called Reology who is in the process of rebranding themselves as 3 Degrees of Consciousness. And one thing that probably was one of the more useful things that I learned from it is that one thing they don't do is they don't blame, nor do they praise. So in terms of relating with other people, and especially with kids, it's like it's not so important to give so much praise to children as to find out and ask them what do you think about it. So some child comes home from school with a painting. Typically, the parents praise the child for the painting rather than ask the question. So how do you like the painting? So in other words, I think as we're always looking for the love and also looking for some sort of verification outside of ourselves, we're not really going to be able to, how do I want to say it, not really going to be able to stand on our own 2 feet in terms of our own worthiness, being fine of who we are, as long, if we're constantly looking for something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned Brené Brown. I mean, she's done such an amazing job and is such an amazing resource and gift, I think, to our Western culture, where so much of our society is based on scarcity and shame. It's unless you're living this life, buying these things, participating in this kind of endless drive for that sense of happiness or contentment or ultimately worthiness. She's done a great job of pulling the scab back on those things and naming shame for what it is and encouraging people to embrace through courage their own shame and vulnerability and living out of that place. With courage, wholehearted living. And she and Kristen Neff, Neff, is another amazing resource. She's done some great research into self-compassion. And essentially Brené Brown and Kristen Neff are joining forces, if you like, and communicating to so many people that as I said earlier, that unless we are showing ourselves the same love and compassion and self-acceptance that we so desire to give to those around us, then what we're doing in many ways can be imploded like a house of cards. But that place of self-acceptance, self-compassion is such a strong place because we're as Eva revealed from a 15-year-old girl in such a horrible place of slavery. She was at the same time immovable and because she knew who she was, she knew she was enough. She knew she was worthy.
Incredible. I don't know if you're aware of it. We actually did an episode. It was number 31 with Renee Aria. It was titled "Shame to Shine, Flip Your Flaws," and this was a lot about shame. This was about a woman that I believe she was getting to be a well-known model, really beautiful, and then she discovered she had a brain tumor, and it completely paralyzed one side of her face, and she had to deal with that in terms of shame. And and we did this episode long before I heard about Brené Brown, but going deeper into the work of Brené, what else would you say? I mean, how does someone usually experience, what is required to go into the work that Brené Brown does? I mean, I know she's got a lot of books and written a lot and on a lot of videos and things. I think she got really well known at a TED Talk. Is that how it all started for her, I think?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm entirely qualified to...
sure you are.
Well, I'll say how I came to Brené Brown was...
That's all I'm asking, sure.
Well, yeah, exactly. Was some of her books, Rising Strong, and The Gift of Imperfection. She's written some amazing books. There are some TED Talks online where she basically put this into practice and was invited to do a TED Talk as a shame and vulnerability researcher. And she said, you know what, none of this means anything unless I'm actually living it. And she was vulnerable during the TED Talk. And as a result, her work came to light. And she's got a website where you can go online and participate in online lessons, Courage Works, I think it's called. And then, as I said, Kristen Neff has joined forces with her recently, and there's a great, again, online classroom that you can go into and really go deep into uncovering our own shame and and dealing with it and walking through it and coming out the other side such that our shame and our sense of unworthiness doesn't define us. Neither does what we do define us. And I suppose, coming back to my journey, that was, I don't know if you've seen Batman Begins, but
I have.
Yeah, that's my favorite line in the whole movie, right? It's in my Batman voice. It's not who I am underneath. It's what I do that defines me. I love that stuff. And actually, that was my my Skype handle for a long time. It's what I do that defines me, until I started to fail. Until what I did was leaving behind all of those women and children. Until what I did was, the Army Ranger motto, leave no one behind. Well, I was leaving a lot of women and children behind, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So again, coming back to Brené Brown's work, I mean, she really helped me with that process, because again, the little magnet that we put on our refrigerator says, what would you do today if you knew you couldn't fail? And that's lovely. It's nice. It's chic. It's great. But Brené, I think, goes even deeper when she says, what would you do today that is worth doing, even if you do fail? So even knowing that we will fail. It's what it means to be human. Is we will fail, and we embrace. We embrace our failures and our weaknesses, and they don't, not as a place of fuel for our shame and our sense of unworthiness. We embrace them wildly and lavishly and abundantly, because that's what it means to be human. Yeah. And that doesn't define us. It's not what we do. And so when we fail, we rise again, because we do so on the basis that we are enough, and we take our values, those things that we hold dear to us, into the arena. And again, I think the value of Brené Brown's work, when it comes, when I think about fighting human trafficking, fighting slavery, or whatever great and noble cause or difference we want to make in the world, that as we are in the arena, stumbling and falling and rising again and falling, that as she says, that the two greatest and most important seats in that arena are empathy for others and ourselves, and self-compassion. And if those two seats are vacant in the arena of our lives, then I guess we will continue to experience what I've, sadly become familiar with: destruction, depression, discouragement, divorce, brokenness, and despair. But by filling those seats up, that changes everything.
So if you're going to be offering, we typically ask people some sort of health tip. One thing that you think people would appreciate hearing, one thing that they could do, one health tip, call it whatever you'd like to do. If there was one thing you were going to say to a lot of people, what would it be?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's to ask yourself, how can I live today from a place of freedom? Where do I need to fill up that place within me? And there's all sorts of ways that that are unique to the individual, to the uniqueness of our own wounds that we carry from our own childhood, and so I suppose it's entirely unique for each person. But it's to go into that place, perhaps firstly uncover those areas where we are living from the false self, from the place of the ego, where we are hustling for our worthiness, and the signs of us doing that are easy to see. It was one of the challenges that I discovered in starting a charitable organization to set other people free. You very quickly discover that you need funding to do that, and so you find yourself essentially. I became a full-time fundraiser, and then you're faced with, so how do you actually go about fundraising? And the invitation in some schools of thought is to use guilt and or subtle forms of manipulation to raise money, so that you can set people free, which for me was just repugnant. I'm not going to enslave people with guilt and or manipulate or deceive some people so that I can set someone else free.
That's vicious.
Yeah, and it just becomes, but that's so easily, just one example of what can happen, I think, when you're hustling for your worthiness. And so I remain vigilant, I suppose, and of those things within us that would seduce us and have us live from a place that is not worthy, that is not whole, that is not loved. So I suppose that, coming back to your question, the one thing I'd say is just to go boldly, courageously with others if need be. The resources of Brené Brown, Kristen Neff, but to go boldly into that place of whatever the wound is, whatever the shame is, and to deal with it, such that when we go into the arena, whether it's fighting human slavery or homelessness or just, going next door to give, to share a meal with our neighbor, or to love those more wholeheartedly within our own families, and to show ourselves the same kind of self-acceptance and love that we want to show others, that we want others to receive from us. I think in the West, for some reason, that seems to be one of the biggest hurdles for us is as I say, this lie that if we treated other people the way the self-critic in our own mind, that if we treated others the way we treat ourselves, if we talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves, we would have no friends. We would have no one that wants to hang around us, and yet we so easily do it to ourselves and sabotage ourselves. Such that you have those shocking statistics that, I think most recently it was 98, 99% of 14-year-old girls don't like who they are. So when those pimps and those boyfriends, quote, come and seduce and sell lies to them in the malls of America, that leaves them so vulnerable, and sex trafficking continues to thrive. So yes, we need the prosecutions. Yes, we need the rescues. But I suppose that's what I'm advocating for as well as those things is embracing a generation of people who are willing to fight from a place of wholeness and self-compassion and acceptance, knowing that I am enough.
Nice. So while remaining present, what is next for you? That's a great question. Nvader has outgrown me in a sense. It's left New Zealand to go offshore and operate in Southeast Asia, and my family live here in New Zealand, and so we parted ways at the beginning of this year, and I guess it's presented a new opportunity to actually further this message of that I've shared with you today, and so I'm essentially doing a lot of speaking, writing, and reflecting, I guess, on how to certainly more authentically participate in moving from a place of slavery to freedom, but to do so in a way that, as we've discussed, is authentic. And speaking at different events to different communities, and really going deeper into what this journey looks like to fight from a place of freedom. Yeah, it's nice. Well, I can tell you right now is when we end this show, I'm probably going to be spending some time in self-reflection on this one, because slavery doesn't have to be slavery. I can see slavery all around in many different degrees. I mean, it can be addiction. It can be relationships. It can be a standard of living versus a quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we, again, I just come back to that way of living where if what we do defines us, then we carry around this garbage can in our soul where all of the stuff that we have done or has been done to us that we don't want people to know about, we stick it in the garbage can, and we keep one hand on the lid of that garbage can, hoping that none of it comes out and that no one will see what is on the inside of our garbage can. And we, on the outside, we hustle for our worthiness with one hand on the lid the whole time. And as you say, that it doesn't work, because inevitably it does seep out through the cracks of the garbage can into our life and shows itself in all kinds of ways, be they addictions, which again fuel not only our own slavery, but the slavery of others. And you touched on addiction. I mean, pornography. There are so many addictions that not only enslave us, but then enslave. I mean, the sex trafficking industry thrives in large part due to the massive pornography industry. They're interrelated. You can't separate them. And but again, if we use shame as a way of trying to fight that, which sadly so many have tried to do. I've been invited to speak at a men's conference where essentially they wanted to shame the men with good intentions. Look, if we can shame these men enough for the porn that they're participating in, and make the connection between what they're doing and human trafficking, then they'll stop. Because they'll see that it's not just them that's enslaved; they're enslaving other people. But it doesn't work, and essentially, I refuse to do that, because shame never leads to a positive outcome. All it does is add to their. Oh man, not only am I destroying my own sex life and potentially my marriage or my relationships, but now I'm also adding to the global slavery, and it just drives, it just makes you all the more desperate to keep the lid on that garbage can. But again, I think the beauty of the work of Brené Brown and others is that she has showed us that it's only by lifting the lid and walking through, allowing that stuff to come out, and from a place of vulnerability and self-compassion, walking through that stuff, that we can become whole and free ourselves.
Nice. Anything else in this wrap-up you want to say?
Well, no, I really appreciate the invitation to be on the show, and danielwalker.nz is the website, and it's I'm really at the in some ways I feel like a novice myself. I'm by no means an expert, and so I guess I in thinking about how to end this, I'm still on the journey myself, but
then we don't end it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just that. There are two paths, and we can. I think the invitation is to the wonderful invitation from my own experience, if I can leave with any words of encouragement, is that while it's painful to lift the lid on that garbage can, because there is so much pain that so many of us have, trauma, would be it bullying in the playground or abuse in the home or the cruel words from a teacher, whatever it is, it's the human experience to carry around shame and trauma. But if we really want to participate in not only our own freedom, but the freedom of humanity moving forward, that's so essential and so wonderful to do so from a place of wholeness and I am enough.
Mm-hmm. Very, very nice. Well, I also wanted to remind everybody that we always include in the show notes all the links and anything that we've included in the particular show. So if you go to alternativehealthtools.com, and at the top left, you can see an episode listing. And not sure what the title of this one will be, but it will be fairly obvious. And if you go to that link and just click on, you'll see all the show notes with the links and links to Brene Brown and everybody else that we've talked about. Well, Daniel, thank you very, very, very much. Really, really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right.